It's now time to move into our discussion for the day, which is on the federal government's mortgage scheme. Of course, we talked about the launch of the 10,000 units. It's actually described as the first 10,000 units for affordable home schemes in Nigeria. This is part of the government's effort to bridge the housing deficit in the country. Now, the scheme is private sector-driven and implemented in partnership with 15 pilot states and the Central Bank of Nigeria. And this is also supported by the World Bank and the African Development Bank. We'll be talking to two guests on the program. Before we bring in the guests, we have with us here Femi Ogunleye, and he's a real estate expert and estate surveyor and valuer. And of course, our regular guest, I'll call him a regular guest on the show, is Johnson Chukwu. He's the CEO of Cowry Assets Management Ltd. But before I bring in this gentleman, let's now listen to this report by Linda Ahigbe.
Ask any Nigerian on the street what your top 3 worries are. Housing is likely to be one of them. The World Bank reported that Nigeria has a 17 million housing deficit and requires 59.5 trillion naira to bridge this deficit. This is a huge figure, bearing in mind that the country's 2014 budget is just 4.962 trillion naira. The federal government is seeking to bridge this gap with the launch of its first 10,000 mortgages for affordable homes scheme. The scheme is intended to help Nigerians have access to affordable housing by applying for mortgages in large numbers. For the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, this scheme is the beginning of the housing revolution in Nigeria.
So today we are kicking off the pre-qualification of people for the first initial 10,000 mortgages to be provided by lenders, most of whom are present here with us. They will now be able to process and provide many more mortgages because of the existence of the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Corporation.
Delivery of affordable housing in Nigeria is also receiving necessary impetus through addressing the issues in land administration and management aimed at ensuring that landowners have secure titles and bankable assets.
Between now and December 31st, 2014, we will be delivering houses and mortgages of 6,705 since 16th of January 2014.
The Minister of Finance, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, assured Nigerians that due to new mortgage underwriting standards as prescribed by the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Corporation, the processing time for pre-qualification has reduced from the usual 6 to 9 months to 3 to 6 weeks. She, however, said this would be subject to the level of risk analysis to be undertaken by the mortgage lender. Linda Ahigbe, Channels Television News.
All right, that was a report by Linda talking about the launch of the first 10,000 mortgages for affordable home scheme by the federal government. Okay, let's now go into the nitty-gritty of this issue. As we have earlier on introduced our guests, we have here Femi Ogunleye, a real estate expert and an estate surveyor and valuer. Thank you so much for coming on the program. That's my far left, and to my immediate left, we have Johnson Chukwu. He's the CEO of Cowry Assets Management Ltd. Thank you for coming on the show as well. I'm sure you listened to that report. I'm going to start with Femi, as an estate surveyor, and housing expert, real estate expert. What sense did you make of it, especially when not just about the report now, when you monitored the launch of the first 10,000 housing units?
It is a nice program for federal government to come out with this type of policy. But my prayer is that the policy will subsist. There will not be breaching along the line, and they will be able to keep it on as they bring in more houses to the people.
Why did you say that you hope that it to be sustained?
Yes, over the years since 1970, we've been having different housing policy. One comes, federal mortgage housing started with the hope that they will be able to provide enough for the people. After that, we come with primary mortgage banking. There comes, the last one was housing fund, National Housing Fund. Then we thought that the National Housing Fund will also take care of so many things. But all the while, everything was jettisoned. So we're hoping that this new idea will be able to will continue, not just for the life of this government. It will be a system that will continue and help the Nigerians.
I'm going to stick with Femi because you're raising some issues here. What do you think, or how would you assess these schemes that you've just highlighted?
It is a nice scheme.
The previous ones, not just the one that's been launched. I mean, you talked about the primary mortgage banking, the National Housing Fund. How would you rate the successes or otherwise?
Why did we stop them along the line? The new government has started a new idea. I am praying that at the end of the tenure of the government, it will not stop. Because there are a lot of money. The government had been able to secure a huge sum of money to be able to help Nigerians. 300 billion is a lot of money. So if through the mortgage refinancing system, it continues, at least for a duration of about 10 years, it will mean a lot in the life of Nigerians.
Okay, let me come to Johnson. Johnson, we've seen government in, government out, and that seems to change whatever plans that a previous government would have. How has that been able to shape the plans by the government, the fact that the government would want every Nigerian to own a home?
Okay, let me start by saying this. It's not as if the government discontinued any of the programs Femi just mentioned. The issue of primary mortgage institutions have always been there, and they still exist. In fact, the Mortgage Refinancing Company of Nigeria will be lending or will be refinancing loans, mortgages created by the primary mortgage institutions. Then on the issue of National Housing Fund, the National Housing Fund scheme is still there under the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria. Nigerians are still assessing mortgages through that. The Nigerian contributors to the National Housing Fund still assess mortgages through the primary mortgage institutions, of course through the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria. But what has happened is that the activities or the mortgages being created by these institutions are not sufficient to meet the housing needs of Nigerians. And that's what the challenge is. You still have the social housing schemes that have been driven by several state governments and the federal government. But that's not, we can't create enough houses. It's said that Nigerians have a deficit of about 17 to 18 million housing units. And how do you close that gap? You're not going to close that gap by the activities of the state government that are creating social housing schemes. You're not going to create that gap by the primary mortgage institutions who cannot access long-term funds because you don't have long-term funds in the system. Most of the funds, about 90% of the funds in the banking system are short-term at 30 days and below. So you don't have access to the long-term funds that will enable the primary mortgage institutions create enough mortgages. And that's why the federal government under the Ministry of Finance set up the Nigerian Mortgage Refinancing Company to refinance, to create liquidity in the mortgage sector and to help develop long-term instruments, mortgage instruments that can help us provide long-term funding in the entire system.
How do you think?
It's not as if the National Housing Fund has been jettisoned or is no longer in existence. It's still there. It's just that they don't have the volume or the number of mortgages as to close the gap we have.
How do you think it intends to go about having to provide the liquidity that you talked about? Because we're looking at long-term funding, 10 years, 20 years, a mortgage loans, a mortgage program. How do you think it will go ahead? Apart from the fact that we've been told that it's private sector driven, what modality do you think is going to
basically what the Nigerian Mortgage Refinancing Company will do is that they will strangle the capital, part of their primary objective is to strangle the capital market and the mortgage refinancing in the primary mortgage institutions. What they do is that they will assess long-term funds from the Nigerian capital market, international capital market. Accordingly, they are working on raising about 50 billion bonds. They already have I mean, they already have in part of their tier 2 capital 300 million, not billion, 300 million USD that was provided by the World Bank. Okay, of that 300 million USD, 250 million of that is part of their tier 2 capital. $25 million is going to a mortgage guarantee scheme, and another $25 million will go to support development of micro mortgage finance products. So they already have, from that 250 million, you can actually say they have about $40 billion, 40 billion naira in terms of capitalization. And then you have, the IFC has also indicated they will put in about $255 million into the Nigerian Mortgage Financing Company. But basic thing is that they are going to develop instruments that are self-sustaining. What they will do is that they issue for bonds. Hopefully, they should be able to come to the market at below 10%, because that's actually where I see the challenge.